can all hear me. So my name's Nina and I'm from Supersonic. I'm just going to give you a really quick introduction to Supersonic before we begin the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's really exciting to announce our second webinar, I think, from the project. Supersonic launched in October 2020, but we basically applied for a social fund from Lisbon City Council back in May. So we could deliver an online digital platform for culture, basically, whilst the pandemic stopped everything else from happening. So we've been running it since then, and we've been hosting webinars, workshops, open calls, online residencies, interviews, and soon we'll have an online exhibition as well. And you can see our website at supersonic.pt. You can also join the mailing list if you're not already on it, because if you're on the mailing list, you generally get first dibs on all the workshops and webinars, and obviously because they're free, they do tend to book up quite quickly. So yeah, that's probably all I need to say about Supersonic, but I will welcome Tim Boddy. He is from London and he graduated from London City College in photojournalism and documentary photography. And he's going to be talking about Anthotypes. I can't say that word very well. Anthotypes for the next 80 minutes. Just to let you know, there'll be a break kind of halfway through, but please don't leave the room because there's just one link. You can go and have a cup of tea, but just be really fast. It's about a 5-minute break. And then there'll be space at the end for questions. So the first half is more listening, and the second half there's going to be a little bit more room for questions. If anyone wants to say anything, put it in the chat box. And also just to let you know that we are recording this webinar. We're not going to show any of your faces, I don't think, if we do it correctly. But if anyone objects to being potentially shown, then please let us know, because we wanted to put this on our site so people can watch. So that's it really. I will hand you over to Tim. Thank you, Tim, for being our host tonight.
Cool. Thank you, Nina, for that introduction, and thank you to Supersonic as well. Just bear with me 2 seconds. I'm just playing with my little screen there. Okay. Okay, so yeah, I'll start by giving you a heads up of what this webinar will entail. It should be about 80 to 85 minutes, depending on certain things, particularly in the second half, which will be a little more fluid. I'll start by talking about my background and my practice. I'll keep that short though, and then get into the history of the Anthotype, as it's quite interesting to how it fits in with the history of photography as well. I'll talk about my project, COVID-19 plant prints, and some other Anthotype-based projects of mine, as that's kind of a good demonstration, I guess, of what an Anthotype is and what it looks like, and how sort of, I guess, process-based things, so how various vegetables affect prints in color, so kind of practical advice. Yep, quick 5-minute break, try and keep it quite quick, I think, just like a little comfort break. And the second half will entail sort of a rundown of the materials you need to make Anthotypes. So I will have objects with me and I'll show you kind of what you need and have a list so you can go away and make some of your own. And also I will be demonstrating how to make a couple of quick Anthotypes in, I guess, kind of a here's one I made earlier kind of way. So I won't have time to go through the whole process of making an Anthotype because they can literally take days to develop, but so I'll skip certain parts of the process, but hopefully you'll get to like an idea of what, yeah, how to make one briefly. Then we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. In regard to questions, feel free to ask questions throughout, but when I'm doing some kind of presentation like I am now, I'm not normally so hot on answering those questions straight away. The second half will probably be, yeah, I'll probably be better in answering those questions if you have any in the moment. And also there's Q&A at the end as well. I'm sure, like, if you do put in a question during the webinar, then I'll try and come back to it in the chat afterwards. But if not, don't be shy of putting your question in again at the end, just in case I miss it. I'm just going to admit a few more people now, and then we will get properly started. Okay, a little bit about myself. Yep, my name is Tim Boddy. I am a freelance photographer, a documentarian, artist. So I'm just going to keep admitting people as I go. And also, yeah, a picture editor by day. That's kind of my part-time job. So in theory, I get time to, time to kind of undertake personal projects, and some of them which you can see on the screen here. And I'll take you through some of the Anthotype-based ones later as well. I also graduated LCC late 2019, early 2020, studying documentary photography at LCC. It's an MA course, and yeah, also a terrible time to graduate just as a pandemic hit as well. So that was slightly annoying. Yeah, so in terms of the history of the Anthotype and how it relates to early photographic processes. So yeah, this is all pre-Anthotype based creations. A chap called Nicephore Niepce created what we kind of recognize as the first ever viable photograph in 1826 or 27. And this photograph, it took, I put here, it's like took at least an 8-hour exposure time, but the more I've looked into it, there's kind of a big question mark around that. It may have taken a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. We don't properly know. And as you can see, it's like a really kind of fuzzy, hazy image. And its name is View from Window at Le Gras. And it's a heliographic image, which means that helio meaning sun, essentially. So it's a sun print of sorts. But the problem with this is that obviously it did take so long to make. Although it was the first photograph that we kind of recognize in terms of photographic process, it wasn't really viable. So it never kind of caught on in the mainstream because, yeah, just wasn't great in that sense. But a person called Louis Daguerre, who you may have heard of, and he was also an associate of Niepce, went on to develop the daguerreotype process, which is what we kind of recognize as first publicly, it's first publicly announcing commercially viable photographic process. And the daguerreotype required only minutes of exposure and produced surprisingly kind of clear and fine and detailed results, unlike the heliographic image. In fact, a lot of the early photographs that you've kind of probably seen in various history books, literature, museums will probably be of a daguerreotype. In the particularly 1840s and 50s and early 60s, it was the most reliable process. In fact, like there's a photograph of Abraham Lincoln, which is taken with the daguerreotype, which I was just looking at the other week, and it is surprisingly clear and detailed for, even though it was like a very early invention in terms of photography. There was someone else at the same time called William Henry Fox Talbot, who developed kind of a rival process, but kind of that they almost worked in silos from each other. So they weren't really aware of each other in terms of what they were creating. And he developed a paper-based caliotype negative and salt print process, which is sometimes called the Talbotype or the caliotype. They kind of have, it's quite an interesting, I guess, character study between these two as how they were introduced to the world. So the daguerreotype, the French government were keen to make it a piece of technology that was free to use to the world. It's like almost a gift to the world. And so they didn't go through like strong patent processes and try to really just, give it for people to use, essentially. But William Henry Fox Talbot was kind of the opposite way in some respects. It was with him and the British government, they decided to patent his process. So it became very, very expensive for people to use his process. So it didn't really catch on in the same way. And it kind of, it was widely criticized, and it kind of held back the process and the science behind it for quite a long time. And therefore the daguerreotype kind of, I guess, won out in the short term, which is of interest. If I was going to write some Hollywood film, I'd probably focus on these two characters and their kind of warring nationalistic factions between Britain and France and the rest of the world. It's quite interesting in terms of that outlook. Another person that is of interest, and certainly of interest as to what we're talking about today, is Sir John Frederick William Herschel, who frankly, yeah, just a brilliant mind. He was a polymath, mathematician, astronomer, chemist, inventor, experimental photographer, and botany enthusiast. In fact, yeah, his kind of reach and of photography was so great. He coined the phrase itself, photography, as well as negative, positive, and snapshot, which we all still very much use today. He was also the first, well, one of the first people who discovered how to fix an image in the late 1830s using, if you're familiar with, if you've developed film yourself, you're probably familiar with the phrase hypo, and he was the person that developed that kind of chemical process behind fixing negatives. Just going to allow some people in. Okay. He also discovered the cyanotype as well, which is also known as thumbprints. Cyanotypes, I'm sure a lot of you may be familiar with, particularly if you're on this kind of, if you're interested in anthotypes. They're those deep blue Prussian prints that you see, yeah, you see quite a lot in art and graphic design, and yeah, just yeah, very popular, kind of used at school still. And he was the person that developed them. Sorry, I skipped ahead there, that's annoying. He was a key player in other photographic processes, including the Anthotype. That was supposed to be the big graphic reveal that I always have a nice glittery GIF in every kind of webinar or talk I do. But yeah, Herschel was also, he's really huge on astronomy as well, amongst other things. And I think he named several Saturn's moons. But yeah, just absolutely brilliant human being. And yeah, the Anthotype process is also called Herschel's flower essence prints. I think that's what he built them at the time. And in 1840, he moved to Hawkhurst in Kent in the UK, which is one of the sunniest parts of the UK. Maybe not saying a lot, but it's kind of important for creating anthotypes, which we'll get onto in a little bit. And he conducted hundreds of experiments with plants and lights over the summer in 1840, originally in his quest to discover color photography. So, which is quite remarkable. In 1840, he was already thinking decades and decades ahead, with, you know, obviously color photography didn't really come into fruition in a serious way until the early to mid 1900s. So yeah, it's remarkable that even though photography had just been invented, he's already thinking about how to use colors from nature to create, what we know as color photography. And he, used botanical items and plants accessible to him in his kind of sprawling garden, which is, I think he had a cottage. This place in Hawkhurst, had like a big garden and a cottage and just surrounded by nature. So it's perfect for the kind of experiments that he was running. And he published his findings in a paper in 1842 titled "On the Action of the Rays of the Solar Spectrum on Vegetable Colors and on Some New Photographic Processes." It discovered the Anthotype process and the effect that the sun and its UV rays has on paper coated with various flowers and plant juices and emulsions. Even though I've talked a lot about Herschel, I should really name check Mary Somerville in particular and Henri Auguste Vogel. Mary Somerville, in fact, you could argue was the inventor of the Anthotype, as she conducted lots of experiments, again, with kind of light and plants and botanical world in the 1820s and 30s. But at the time, she was not allowed to publish her findings as she was a woman. And in the science world, that's just not something that could be done. She is absolutely crucial to the invention of the Anthotype. To Herschel's credit, he did talk a lot about Mary Somerville in his research and did credit Mary Somerville with a lot of his findings. It's only in I think in the last few years where we've kind of had an understanding of how brilliant and important Mary Somerville was. In fact, the word scientist is I was going to say invented by Mary Somerville, but she was the first person to be attributed as a scientist, because until her and her work, people were generally called man of science or person of science. But because she was such a formidable scientist and a woman, they had to think of a new terminology. And so, in essence, she was the world's first scientist. So that's just a little side fact there. And yeah, in Anthotypes, it's using plant prints to try and introduce colors into photograph, as I mentioned. And yeah, I guess it combined two of his passions at the time, which is obviously he had like such an interest in photographic chemicals and photographic processes, and he shared his findings with Talbot and Daguerre, who kind of mentioned before. And yeah, he combined this with his love of botany. And this is just a brief extract from his paper. And it's kind of like, I'm saying this because I'm going to mention this because it's like a good summary of what an anthotype is. And he says, the action is positive. That is to say, light destroys color, either totally or leaving a residual tint, on which it has no further or very much slower action. And thus has affected a sort of chromatic analysis, in which two distinct elements of color are separated by destroying the one and having the other outstanding. And yeah, this is, I believe, is by John Herschel, credited from 1839, titled The Royal Prisoner. That's an example of what a photorealistic anthotype looks like. I don't know too much about it, and the information on this is kind of sketchy on the internet. So yeah, this is something that probably requires like a good amount of research, but it's like a good demonstration of the kind of thing he was doing at the time, nevertheless. And this is one of mine that I created a couple of years ago. And this was made using beetroot stem, beetroot being a particularly good botanical item to use. And I'll get onto that more about that in a minute. And this was about a project on LGBTQ+ spaces in London that I undertook, yeah, a couple of years ago when I was at university. And it was in reaction to, yeah, something like 56% of LGBT spaces disappeared in London between 2006 and 2016. And this is like one of those spaces. And this is, yeah, continuing that project. The one on the right is again of beetroot stem, but this is of beetroot leaves is the outline. And this was from a LGBTQ plus gardening space, which I took the items for. So it's kind of interesting to link in, yeah, these two ideas. And the one on the left is a poem, which is by John Donne, but it's found on the wall of Derek Jarman's cottage. Derek Jarman being, yeah, brilliant artist and campaigner from the 80s, who, if you're not aware of his work, I recommend like investigating him. And yeah, he produced an amazing kind of DIY garden in Kent. And yeah, his work touches on many themes, including the HIV crisis, but he uses the plant world in a really interesting way. And this was kind of like a nod to his creativity. And in the background, there's a slight, I think it's purple sprouting broccoli is kind of the outline. But yeah, it just shows you can, with an anthotype, you can take many different forms. You can be quite playful with it. You don't have to be necessarily literal in terms of photorealism. You can, yeah, use different objects and yeah, have fun with it. And this was like a good project to express, yeah, creativity, I suppose. Yeah, a little bit more about the anthotype process. Something that is probably very important to note is that it is an impermanent and unstable process. And what I mean by that is that it can't be fixed like you would a regular film photograph. So you use all these chemicals, which I won't get into properly now. And then at the end, you have a negative, which is kind of this stable thing. It kind of stays around forever, essentially. But with anthotypes, there's no way of fixing them. So they never truly stop developing. So what that means, you essentially kind of have to hide them in the dark or put them in a room that doesn't get any UV light. And then they should either, yeah, not change or fade too much. But yeah, because it's unstable, that's one of the reasons why it's not used loads. I've put seldom used there, although it does definitely have its fans. And I've seen lots of really interesting work, particularly recent in the last few years, probably because I've been looking for it and I've been more aware of the process myself. But yeah, there's lots of artists that do use it, and people use like various dyes and items from the plant world. But yeah, it's not quite the same as like the cyanotype, which is like ubiquitous and it's used quite a lot. And yeah, a lot of people have heard of cyanotypes as opposed to anthotypes, which is like not so well known. And yeah, it's created by extracting juice from petals, leaves, any botanical item, stems, and then you kind of, I'll demonstrate this in a bit, but then you kind of create your, like an emulsion or dye or paint or whatever you want to call it. And then, yeah, you can just paint with this plant juice essentially. And yeah, again, short show and tell towards the end of the talk in that regard. There's many variables in regards to anthotypes. Sorry, I'm just going to take a swig of water, 2 secs. Number one is the light and time of year, which are obviously interlinked. So yeah, anthotypes process by UV light hitting them on whatever surface you have, so be it paper or cloth. And the stronger the UV's rays, like the faster the process will be, and the more intense the process will be. So for example, if you're making an anthotype in mid-June and it's a really hot sunny day and the UV index is like off the chart, then you'll probably be able to create one in an afternoon, because obviously the sun's UV rays are really strong and it will react quicker and blah, blah, blah. But if you're creating one, say in bleak midwinter, and it's cloudy all the time, basically what we had in January here in London, then you could be looking at weeks for your anthotype to develop. So yeah, depending on these other factors, but yeah, it could be looking at 3 or 4 weeks. Heat is also related. I guess that's kind of related to light to a certain extent. But if you did have, for example, 2 sunny days, one's 25 degrees, one's 10 degrees, then the 25-degree day is probably going to be quicker. And in fact, like when I've had my anthotypes out in the sun and I kind of touch them on the glass, you can feel the heat being trapped in the glass. And yeah, a hot day kind of emphasizes that, if you like, in a strange kind of way. Didn't explain that very well, but I think you know what I mean. Yeah, and also obviously the plant and emulsion used, so the plant juice itself that you extract. Not all botanical items can be used as anthotypes because they just don't react to the sun's UV rays in an adequate way for what's needed. And also, like, particularly if you're working with lighter flowers or petals, if you extract the juice and it's just like a pale white color, then it has nowhere for it to go, if that makes sense. It can't really get any lighter. And yeah, some certain dull colors like don't work very well either. So yeah, I'll talk you through what botanical items are particularly good at working in a bit. But yeah, that's just a heads up. Yeah, not everything can be anthotyped. The pulping process, that's a slight variable, I suppose, in terms of if you get something that's quite, sometimes when you extract a liquid, it's quite smooth and it kind of paints really well. Sometimes it's like a bit gritty and doesn't quite so much. So that can, yeah, be another variable. Additives used. So sometimes I tend to use a drop of alcohol, be it like pure alcohol or something like vodka, something that's like a clear alcohol at least. Or yeah, again, that's something I'll get onto in a little bit. And the paper material used to paint onto. So I generally use quite thick art paper, but you can use organic cloth. Yeah, there's essentially many things you could use potentially. But for most of my projects, it's been quite consistent with paper, as long as it's organic, because if you start using paper that kind of, it's just like regular A4 printing paper, then they normally have like a coat of chemicals on them, and that can really interfere with the process, generally in a negative way. But yeah, also something that's a thick art paper, it actually holds the weight of the juice as well. If it's too thin and flimsy, then it tends to like cup and bend, as you can imagine. So yeah, all those variables are kind of, yeah, interlinked as well. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about my project, COVID-19 plant prints, which I began nearly a year ago now, which is remarkable to think that, yeah, we've nearly had a year of on and off lockdowns in the UK at least. And yeah, this was a project that, yeah, has a few meanings behind it. Probably the main reason or yeah, its main reason for existence is to do with well-being and mental health. So I'm someone that kind of, like a lot of people, suffers from anxiety, and it just has like various, yeah, how I approach mental health is kind of important to me. And I started this from a place of like in late March, when everything was, there was a huge external chaos in the world. And it was kind of difficult to process what was going on. And we all of a sudden had like loads of time on our hands, and there was ever increasing amount of, you know, dystopian news alerts all the time, and like checking my phone every 5 minutes, refreshing Twitter, looking at the Guardian, see what situation here, there, and everywhere, looking at the news. But doing this Anthotype process, which is obviously something that's like very hands-on, so I could like dedicate almost a whole day to it. Like I would get up in the morning, go for a walk in my neighborhood when we're allowed to go outside for an hour a day, and then pick various items from the park, like normally weeds or whatever was available for my exercise. Then bring them back, and then spend like a couple hours in the kitchen with various kind of emulsion juices. And some days I like had, you know, 12 or 14 going on at once, and had like many different pots. And yeah, it was something that was very tangible, very hands-on, very tactile. And when I was doing kind of this process, I wasn't looking at my phone. I wasn't so much aware of the external world. So it's a way of channeling that energy into something positive, I suppose. And yeah, it's something that definitely helped me through that very strange time. This was all during lockdown 1, I should say, when I'm talking in the past tense. I know we're in lockdown currently, but this was created from late March to early June, I think, of last year. Yeah, it's also documenting the passage of time, I suppose, as well, because like time became quite abstract during, particularly that first month or two. Like a week felt like it lasted a month, and then the other month raced by. And with Anthotypes, because they also required a passage of time, so some of these took maybe an afternoon or at least a day, and some of them took 3 or 4 weeks. So it's kind of quite funny how time flowed in strange and abstract ways. And I guess it's my kind of, as a documentarian, it's my instinct to document like this very, very crazy time that we were living in. So this is kind of just a document of that time. And also an ode to the urban spaces and parks around me, because these are all picked from various, I'm quite blessed in East London. There's quite a few different parks that are near me, or like Tower Hamlets Cemetery or the Olympic Park, Victoria Park. And this is kind of like an ode to those in a way, which also links back to this idea, I guess, of well-being and mental health, and like being outside and being able to be in like surrounded by nature, which I think has enormously has positive benefits. So I'll take you through a few of them now. The one on the left is of a meadow buttercup leaf, which is a weed, and this was found in Tower Hamlets Cemetery. And the emulsion, so that pink, is made from beetroot stem. And this was created day 30 to 34. So it took 4 days to make this particular one on the left. The one on the right is of baby spinach emulsion, and the print is a daffodil. Just going to admit someone. And this was also found in Tower Hamlets Cemetery, and also took 4 days. And this one on the left is of Californian poppy from the Olympic Park. And there was a certain time when I was going on my hour-long walks around the area. And there's one day I went through the Olympic Park, and all of a sudden there was just a wall of orange in front of me. And there was tens of thousands of Californian poppies just came into bloom. And so, I thought, oh, that'd be fun to use. So I picked one of those. And because there's so many of them, I didn't feel bad about picking them as well. But we'll get onto that kind of side of things in a little bit. And the emulsion used was red cabbage emulsion, which is a good one to use, but also requires a lot of patience. So this actually took 10 days to make. It was particularly stubborn, and I didn't even know if it was going to work at one point. I was kind of kept checking it, like, every day, every morning. I look at it, it's like, don't think it's changed that much. But patience paid off for that particular one. Although there's some that I've kind of waited I put a lot of time in, a lot of effort, and you know, put 4 or 5 of them out, and then I look 2 weeks later and they just haven't worked. So yeah, it's going back to that thing of like, not everything can be anthotypes, and these other variables can affect it in different ways as well. The one on the right is of wool barley, which is kind of essentially kind of grass that grows near water, I think. There's also from the Olympic Parks, there's an area called the Waterglades there. And this is of Cavolo Nero, which is, if you don't know that, it's a bit like spinach, I suppose, spinach, kale, that kind of family. Again, I didn't know if Cavolo Nero could be anthotypes, but I kind of took a punt as it kind of felt like it would, just based on how it looks. And yeah, it did work. So it works surprisingly well. This only took 1 day, and it's kind of quite a sharp outline as well. This one is on the left is of bracken. It's kind of fern, and it's again with the emulsion is beetroot stem, and I also added some port to it as well. And that's why it's got a slightly different color. So for example, if I go back 2 slides, that's kind of like quite a bright pink on the left here. And this one is kind of more of a deeper hue. And effectively the port kind of stops, acts as like almost like a stopper in a way. So it slowed down the development time. And yeah, this took, I think, 8 days to make, it looks like. But yeah, that was just like a happy accident in a way of just trying something new, because yeah, why not? It's like a good time to experiment with this process. And the one on the right is also port and beetroot stem as well. The one on the left here is Hypstrum dark red flower, and that is the emulsion from the flower. That's this is again was almost another happy accident. We got sent a bulb, I think, a year before, well, probably 2 years ago now, and it had been in our front room for seemingly ages, and it kind of had some stems and leaves growing out of it, but it never flowered at all, and it was just sitting in the living room, just looking at a bit sad, really. But then all of a sudden, just one day in late May, just within the space of a day or two, like it bloomed, it's like super impressive, like these huge petals came out, and it was like, wow, where did that come from? And they lasted for, yeah, not even that long, probably just under a week. But as they were dying, I thought, haha, maybe it's time to experiment with this. So I kind of took the petals and yeah, kind of squashed them up and extracted the juice, with kind of a sizable amount of work as well, because the petals although they're quite large, they're quite dry. They didn't feel like they're holding much liquid. So I had to really go to town on them and like just about squeeze out enough for just two small sheets of A5. And again, it was that thing, like I had no idea if it would work or not. And it did. It took 13 days. So I had to, again, be patient, but it was one of those that kind of paid off in the end. And the outline is of cow parsley, which is, yeah, of abundance in Mile End Park and all the other parks around here. Cow parsley is another weed. And the one on the right is, again, of cow parsley, but it's kind of slightly different form. So it's a bit later in its growing process, I think. And this is of beetroot stem emulsion. And also I added in some turmeric as well, just turmeric powder, which is why it's, again, a slightly different shade of pink as opposed to the first one that I showed you. And also because it's got turmeric in, it's got a slightly gritty texture to it, which I like as well. It's not quite as clean as some of the others. And again, that was all about experimentation. I've kind of used this phrase before, but because I often do these when I'm in the kitchen, got like a decent sized counter where we are. I feel like cross between like the world's worst chef and a mad scientist, just like experimenting with like various things on my kitchen shelf, like, oh yeah, bung that in, yes, put a bit of beetroot in there, let's put a bit of turmeric, put bicarbonate of soda or whatever might be there, and especially with the alcohol as well, just trying to use up the alcohol that's been sitting on my shelf for ages that I don't want to drink because it's like gross or whatever. And yeah, here's some quick behind the scenes shots, if you like. So this will help you get a better sense of the process behind. The one on the left is just facing the sun, so that UV rays are obviously hitting the prints there. And that's, yeah, kind of my front window. And so I'd move them out normally from my back window, which would get the some sunlight in the morning. Then at about 1 o'clock, I normally put them out in the front window to, yeah, get the sun as it moved around the house, if you like. One on the right is just like, yeah, some various paint emulsions that I'm working with. Just yeah, a little behind the scenes there. One left is just as I painted them, I put them in the dark to dry. Obviously, in the dark, they won't start reacting in theory. The one left is the hallway is darker than it looks. It's a lot darker than that, put it that way. And the one on the right is again just more out the front there. You're getting a sense of how they develop. One on the left, that's a good one to show because you can see kind of the outline and almost the eclipse, if you like, of I think that's cow parsley on it, and I've just removed it from its frame, and so yeah, that's just freshly developed, if you like. And the one on the right is the red cabbage, which I referred to earlier, and yeah, that was hard work to really actually extract juice from because they're surprisingly thick, and so yeah, I was getting quite a workout on my arm with that one. In fact, I think I might have even given up and started boiling it a little bit, which can be a viable option to do if you're having something that's particularly stubborn and you can't really extract the juice very well. You can boil it or lightly steam it. Just like being a chef, really. One on the left is just some more behind the scenes of dyes and a bit of port there, and some more on the right of them developing. And I think that is a good time for a break. I'm trying to be quite quick. So I make it's 1839, 1840. So yeah, be back in 5 minutes.